Welcome back to the Truth Over Comfort show. So this is a follow-on from the previous video I'd literally just released on this report. Previously, I went through and actually spoke about what was in the report, read the key sections for each finding. Today, we're going to focus on clips from the hearing, so I'm not going to do any reading from the report. The hearings do mainly focus on just the DoD having no visibility, willfully ignoring reports, having no one to do an investigation into the activities discussed, and they actually kind of do get grilled a bit. They never really answer properly, but the committee actually does circle back and ask them again, no, hang on, can you answer the question, please? They do touch on some of the characters in this and the activities, but of course they're speaking to two DoD officials and one who is in the government representative of the DoD. So just provide a little context. If you want, watch the previous video, the whole thing, or just watch the first 15 minutes where I speak about what the report is, some of the findings, the contract, why they did private. I will touch on it briefly here, but I don't want to rehash everything. I also did write an article on it. The report is about 70 pages. 66 of key information and then just references. I read the whole report, condensed it down into 6 pages, which is about 15-minute read and 3,800 words. So if you're more of a reader, read the article and then either watch my other video or watch this one with the clips if you prefer video, then rather than me sort of reading from the report. This one you can actually hear from, and you heard from the horse's mouth and writing the other one. Now you can hear it from same characters in video format. So what are we looking at? Warlording, extortion and corruption along the US supply chain in Afghanistan. It's a 6-month investigation by this committee here, the Subcommittee on National Security and Foreign Affairs Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, US House of Representatives, mouthful, in June 2010. So just to actually give you a brief bit of context, I'm going to do the same as I did in the last video and just read the first paragraph from the article, and then we're going to jump in to the clips. So a report in 2010 by the US Congress came out called Warlording, Extortion and Corruption Along the US Supply Chain in Afghanistan. This report detailed how the private contractors and subcontractors bringing US supplies to their forward operating base, FOB, along the way had to go through a journey of bribes and protection rackets to warlords, commanders, the Taliban, and Afghan officials, and insurgents too. Many of the subcontractors had to pay warlords of small militias who controlled certain highway routes to protect their trucks when passing certain areas, through fear of being taxed another time. The report also details how the DoD officials have been sent a series of reports and complaints from the contractors about this and did not seem to care, as long as the supplies made it to the base. The report details how the DoD had no visibility of these reports and activities because they barely went past the wire of their base, the fence. This $2.16 billion contract given by the DoD to the trucking contractors was directly paradoxical to stated justifications they were there for. The US aimed to curtail corruption in the country, yet this directly funded warlordism, corrupt officials, and even created a market for it due to their presence, as their occupation meant these supplies passed through the country, allowing certain elements to extort from it. Of course, the biggest inversion in reality was these supplies were going to them to fight the Taliban and insurgents, all the while funding these same elements to fight them. The only way to get these supplies to them was to fund all these elements, was the war not futile from the start. And here there's a Hillary Clinton quote that talks about one of the major sources of the funding to the Taliban is protection money from Western aid and construction projects and things like that, nation building. This was unrelated to this investigation. This was actually just her testimony to the Senate Foreign Relations. Again, read the article and I mentioned it in the previous video. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about the contracts, but instead of the US military doing the mission themselves of getting the supplies from Pakistan to their base, they used private contractors because the Soviets, they did that in the 1980s, Afghan-Soviet war, and they basically turned into combat missions and it took away too much of their fighting ability in other areas. So they went private to these contractors who subcontract out, and again, like a Russian doll system. He will speak about the contract a bit here, and then again, touching on that, some of the characters, Matula. Rahula's known as the butcher by the villagers. Others control the local government. They drug smuggle. NATO's can put in Australia, Dutch, US, and British forces all have to use these guys. They have no choice. They're under their thumb. Basically, they're bitch. Some of them even need their permission to get through. The money is going to them to basically just think of it like organized crime. He will mention Tony Soprano, that they control certain areas. So instead of thinking of it as warlords and tribalism, think of organized crime, the mafia. They control this highway, which, you know, supplies have to go through. They say you can use us as security, you know, pay us, you have no trouble with the police and, you know, anyone attacking you. But if you don't, maybe stuff will go wrong. Maybe the police will turn up, maybe get a flat tire, maybe your suppliers will get attacked, who knows, or stolen. That indirect threat, basically hire them. If you don't, as a lot of the contractors reported and the truckers, coincidentally, you know, they ran into trouble when they didn't hire them. So they all basically use them as known as a protection racket. So I'm going to go into the first clip explaining about this. As I said, watch the first 15 minutes of the other video for more context. Or to be fair, in this clip, he sort of sums it up kind of well. Read the article, up to you. I want to just hide myself.
In our constitutional democracy, Congress is charged with overseeing that the executive branch executes its responsibilities in accordance with the law. Toward that end, this Congress has invested the Subcommittee on National Security and Foreign Affairs with a clear mandate to root out waste, fraud, and abuse wherever we may find it. Real oversight is a powerful tool for transparency and accountability, not for political grandstanding. Today's report by the majority staff represents the best tradition of constructive oversight. After 6 months, 31 witnesses, 25,000 documents, hundreds of hours of work, and yes, even tea with one of the warlords at the heart of the investigation, the report provides the subcommittee, the Congress, and the American people with significant insight into how the Department of Defense has managed the supply chain for the United States troops in Afghanistan. An investigation of this nature is akin to a puzzle. We've laboriously gathered the pieces on the table, fit together the edges, and filled in enough sections for us to understand what the picture will look like, but there are still portions to be completed. Though the puzzle is unfinished and important questions remain, the portrait that emerges is of the Department of Defense's systematic failure of management and oversight of contractors along the Afghan supply chain. In the past 8 years, the United States has placed an enormous burden on our brave men and women in uniform. The military has been asked to fight 2 grueling conflicts in some of the most difficult and hostile conditions imaginable. The challenge of supplying our troops in the field is simply staggering. To absorb the strain of these burdens, the Department of Defense has increasingly looked to civilian contractors. In some cases, using contractors rather than military personnel makes sense. What initially was a cost-effective expediency, however, has morphed into an institutionalized reliance and a dangerous shortcut. As the Congressional Budget Office put it, the recent increase in the size and scope of contractor support in the battlefield has been unprecedented in United States history. In Afghanistan today, we have roughly 90,000 troops, but reportedly use almost 110,000 contractors. As the Department of Defense has increased its reliance on contractors in conflict zones, it has not sufficiently increased its capability and expertise to manage and oversee those contractors. At the Defense Contract Management Agency, for example, the civilian workforce fell by 60% between 1990 and 2006. The combination of a massive increase in contracting and insufficient management and oversight capability is a recipe for disaster. In the case before us today, we have just such a disaster. The Department of Defense outsourced almost all operational components of the supply chain that provides our troops with the food, water, fuel, and equipment they need to do their job. Critically, despite laws and regulations mandating strict oversight of armed private security guards in conflict areas, the department outsourced management responsibility for those hired gunmen to other contractors. The department put trucking contractors, many of which only had 2 or 3 employees in theater, in charge of procurement, management, and oversight of small armies of private security contractors. The trucking companies were then directed to send their subcontracted trucks and subcontracted security through many of the most dangerous locations on Earth while carrying millions of dollars of critical supplies for our troops. According to the report, many in the Department of Defense apparently took comfort in these arrangements. The responsibility for security and risk of loss was on the contractors and their subcontractors. The prevailing attitude seemed to be that as long as the trucks got to their destination, don't rock the boat. When problems did arise, the response was to rap the prime contractors on the knuckle and remind them to follow the terms of the contract. To their credit, many of the contractors immediately recognized that they could not adequately procure, manage, or oversee mass-scale security services in Afghanistan, and they raised red flags. They told the military that they were being extorted, making massive protection payments for safe passage, and possibly, quote, funding the insurgency, close quote. These extraordinary warnings appear to have fallen on deaf ears. The contracting officers, contract managers, and relevant regulators consistently responded that the companies just needed to get the trucks to their destination. Contractors raised serious concerns about extortion payments funding warlords within 2 days of the contract performance beginning. And here we are 14 months later, and nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. The benefits of outsourcing trucking and security on the supply chain are clear. No United States troops are put in harm's way, and they can instead focus on their energies on higher priority missions. This report helps us also weigh the cost of contracting out the supply chain. In short, this contract appears to have fueled warlordism, extortion, corruption, and maybe even funded the enemy. United States taxpayer dollars are feeding a protection racket in Afghanistan that would make Tony Soprano proud. Further consideration must now be given to determine whether the Department of Defense's failure to provide management or properly manage or oversee its supply chain logistics contracts has undermined the overall United States mission. In January of this year, Major General Michael Flynn, our principal military intelligence officer in Afghanistan, wrote a public report saying that the United States is largely blind, deaf, and dumb when it comes to understanding local politics, power dynamics, and economic structures within Afghanistan. I would add that the United States is also largely blind, sometimes willfully so, to the corrupting influences of our own contracting and development work. We must be self-aware of how a massive footprint in Afghanistan can affect such a sensitive environment. Before I close, I want to address
So you can see there, he actually uses the word willfully blind. And as for the report, there's just file after file from the contractors in these 25,000 documents they got from the DoD and the contractors, warning about this from a couple of days in, even reports before this, before the contract even exists, you know, warning the DoD about the Taliban are asking for money for safe passage. So for him to say willfully, which I'm glad he did, it's definitely not an exaggeration of just how many files and reports are all through this report, and the DoD did nothing about it. As I said, this hearing, they mainly do focus on questioning the DoD. They don't really, you know, the report is the bit they talk about, you know, the warlordism and all the stuff that goes along with it and money going to the Taliban. This is more just about gritting the DoD, asking them why was there no investigation, ignoring it. They do talk about Commander Rahula, and he shows the chart of all the different highways they controlled, and clearly weapons they shouldn't be using because they have regulations for which one they should actually use. So it is mainly about the DoD, but in the clips they do, you know, mention it and question them, you know, about it. So it's not all as boring as it sounds. I've already watched the whole hearing, and I watched the second part. Second part was boring. It was with different people, and it wasn't really about gritting. It was more about what can we do for the policy change. It's a lot more interesting than it actually sounds. Otherwise, I would not have sat through an hour and 44 of a government hearing. But I thank C-SPAN. They actually, you know, have them all recorded on there. There's just loads and loads and loads. So I'm going to go to the next clip that just talks about how he's actually kind of grilling one of them about their vetting process of the companies, how, because the DoD has to get the information about what's going on from the prime contractors, the 8 host nation trucking contractors that is part of the $2.16 billion taxpayer contract, of course, taxpayer. And there's about 8 companies that they use. So obviously he's saying, then we vetted it, great. And he's saying, well, how come only a couple of them have like people in theater? Because if the DoD is relying on information from the contractors and they're not on the ground because they subcontract out and subcontract out again, they don't know what's going on. Is it appropriate? And this guy's like just worming his way out of it. So I'm going to show you that clip now.
In the chain of command for the commanding general of JCCIA. It would flow through CENTCOM, but the contracting authority actually flows through Mr. Ed Harrington, who works for Dr. O'Neill, the Army Acquisition Executive. I am not in that chain of command.
So, all right, so let me talk to you as the former JCCIA, as you say.
Yes, sir.
That. Under the terms of the host nation contract, there are 8 prime contractors, and they're required to provide security for their trucks and the supplies that are carried in those trucks. The security provisions in the contract specify about 6 security vehicles and 24 guards as armed security for every 20 trucks. The host nation trucking companies run up to about 8,000 truck missions per month that require the procurement, management, oversight of a small army of thousands of Afghan security guards. So my question to you is, do you believe it's appropriate to have trucking contractors, many of which only have 2 or 3 at most of their employees in theater, and they have never been on the road? Do you believe it's appropriate to have them managing and overseeing thousands of armed security guards in a war zone?
Sir, under the host nation contract that we have with those 8 vendors, part of that, as you just described, is that they provide their own private security, and then they go out and subcontract for that, which is allowable under the terms and conditions of the contract that we put into place.
Yeah, but I guess my question is, how appropriate is, once you do that, I know you're sort of this, the suave thing to say, like, all right, that's done.
Yes,
Give it to them and they're off, it's all on their shoulders now. But when we know that there's only 2 or 3 people in their company that are in country and that they've never been out on the road, do we think that that's the appropriate oversight and management here?
So it's important that when we vetted each of those contractors up front before we actually signed the host nation contract, it was important that we make sure that they had the right management in place.
So you thought the 2 or 3 was sufficient, or you didn't know the 2 and 3 were all that
So
they
when
had?
we make the award, we clearly considered the management structure of each one of those 8 contractors sufficient in terms of being able to oversee the operations.
So I want to pin you down a little bit here if I can. So you thought the 2 or 3 were sufficient to oversee those thousands of Afghan security guys, because that's all they had. Did you not know that's all they had, or did you think that'll be just fine, 2 or 3 is fine?
So at that time, I had no visibility into how many people, at my level, how many people actually were involved in the day-to-day management of.
And I guess part of the problem is nobody seems to have had visibility into that, because if you read the report, you get down is that even people between you and those contractors could never tell you who was doing it.
Sir, I can assure you that the principal assistant responsible for contracting in Afghanistan, that's Park A, the colonel that ran it, as well as a contracting officer, used a very rigorous source selection evaluation criteria when they looked at, there were 35 initial vendors who submitted proposals for the host nation trucking contract. When we looked at it initially, we narrowed that down to 10 vendors. And we looked at technical capability, managerial experience. They looked at past performance as well as past experience, security, how they plan to execute security, and price. Price was a key factor, but all those factors went into the final decision to select them.
I guess I'm still unclear, though, whether the criteria of 2 or 3 people in that company to manage the whole thing was okay with them, or they didn't know that. Did they not know that they were paying warlords to do some of it, or did they think that that was okay, it's a cost of doing business? Those are the things I think we need to ask.
Sir, I can't answer your question. I would have to go back and look at the actual decision that was made for the source selection and determine, based upon the bids of those contractors, the exact management structure of each one of them. I personally can't recall a discussion whether there were 2 or 3 or more within the management structure of the 8 prime vendors.
They love just not even knowing anything new. That anytime you hear a committee in government, they're either, oh, I don't have that, on me now. I have to get back to you in private. No, sir, I don't know. They never know anything, and you could be like, oh, they're so far the chain of command, they don't know anything. It's great for plausible deniability. You got these contracts, you want to win this war. You might have to pay a few warlords. They're so far away from it, they don't know what's going on. They don't care because they don't see anything on the ground that's actually representing. And then when the hearings come, they just deny it, baby. I don't know nothing. Never do. His face kind of annoys me a bit as well. As he goes on, he just, I don't know, reminds me of some military figure. He probably goes to like Bohemian Grove. All the men in the woods getting a bit gay. Get the vibe of him, to be honest. Bit of a random assessment, but it's just his smile, and he must hate these hearings though. Just always getting asked these questions. It's like a politician. It's not hard to wake up and you're juggling so many lies. You don't even know what you last said, and the narrative changes. And then suddenly, they're lying about just everything. And it's so great just having the truth on your side, just not having to juggle. What did I say then? And then just come on, just be a normal, moral person. But no. So the next bit we're going to go into is, so he spoke about there how the vetting process of the companies, and he's saying because they chose it, there's no way they could, they would have mismanaged it and not chosen them for a certain reason. We thought they was the best. Bit of a cop out, to be honest, and there's pretty much all cop outs. Guy in the middle, actually, he's probably the worst for it. The other two are a bit better asking questions. Anything they do have, I give them the benefit of the doubt. The report came out the night before, so I don't know why they did that. The committee, I don't know if they're trying to ambush them so they can prepare all these lies. I don't know. They should still know what's going on in their military, in their war, because obviously these three were chosen for a certain reason. They obviously have to do with the contracts. But the next clip, just a short one again, goes into basically just no interviews under the prime contractors. They just didn't really bother to do that ever. A few of the other clips are a bit longer, but then all not too long.
Generally,
3710 is what I remember. C-SPAN for some reason sometimes does
in Iraq, this morning.
Does sometimes freeze for a second on your phone. Actually, you have to refresh the page. Lucky here, you don't have to. So this guy actually reminds me a bit of the mafia, because he's got that. I'm guessing he's got a bit of Italian, a bit of a big guy. He actually the government official who is like deputy secretary in DoD. When they're speaking, the thing always comes up. So we're going to go to this next clip now, and I'm going to minimize myself.
I cannot tell you specifically yet that's in violation, because there is a possibility that contractor had the authority, requested and received authority to carry additional weapons.
Can you tell me how many people anybody at DoD has interviewed beyond the prime contractor level, under the prime contractor level? As we know from the report, that the prime contractors rarely know who even provides the security, the subcontractors below them. Has DoD interviewed anyone beyond the prime contractors?
At the DoD level, sir, I am not aware of anyone that did that. And it also brings up the second question that you brought up earlier. The challenge I think we have had is that we have relied on the licensing process that the Minister of the Interior had. Minister Atmar, the previous Minister of the Interior, was very aggressive in trying to make that the standard, to the extent we were restricted to the number of companies we could operate with, the numbers of contractors they could have. As I told you in my opening testimony, however, I feel that that's insufficient. We need this third party.
In my remaining seconds, I just want to say, I mean, if you haven't ridden along with the convoys, very, very rarely, if ever, and if you haven't interviewed anybody beyond the prime contractor, then it's tough to know what's really going on. And beyond that, it seems that I would feel a lot better to hear somebody say, hey, this is the price of business in Afghanistan. This is all we can do. We can't be like the Soviets, who devoted 3/4 of their force structure to protecting supply routes. It's not the most efficient way. We understand that. But just to say it's not occurring, we don't see it, so it must not be occurring, that just seems a little too much to hear.
Again, just a short clip. it just leads us well into the next one. That was just a little short bit of evidence that no one has gone out to speak to the, below the contractors. And as the other committee member says, if, you're not interviewing them, if you're not going out, how would you have any idea what's going on? Because through this whole hearing, they're like, oh yeah, we take these claims serious. They were going to, investigate properly, speak to all the people we need to. I'm guessing nothing ever happened. There was actually a hearing down here, something happening. Maybe I should watch them another time, see if there's a follow-up. Looks like the same guy, looks a bit aged a bit, another year. So, yeah, just way older. It was just an unlucky photo. Yeah, they say they take it serious, and they either just straight up lying, or it's just easier to ignore it, because the work they'd have to do if it's all true. They don't want to interview them because they don't want to then have to deal with actually having to come up with a new strategy different to the service and themselves, other than just leaving the country and giving up on the war, which they should. They should never have been there, should never occupied. I'm not going to talk about that today, but that's the third option. If they can't think of one, is just us in the West, we have such great values. We're not willing to pay warlords. We're not willing to add to the corruption in the country that we were there for. If we're there to fight this corruption and we're only adding to it, then we've got to leave, because we're the West and we have these values and freedom and democracy, and we put in this government that's meant to be democratic and it's corrupt. No. Nah, it's not happening, is it? I'm going to keep going. So I'm going to go to the next clip now that just leads on to, again, reports, no action taken. No one's gone out to inspect, and no one's talked about anyone. This is a bit longer. Just bear with me 1 second while I find it.
It's sort of amazing. 2 days after this contract went into effect, there were a stream of complaints already filing. People were reporting problems with who they were paying and having to pay off people to work on. And then 25,000 documents that were replete with emails, with incident reports, with reportings of situation where people thought they might be payments to the insurgents. They were concerned about paying warlords. They were concerned about the corruptive effect. So to say that now if we heard about it, we're going to go find out if it's real or not, we're going to try to get enough evidence to prosecute, it brings to mind a couple of points. One is, it's been 14 months, and you want to prove that, go out and talk to Commander Rahula, except he's never met anybody. He's never met a single person in the United States government where he would admit openly, as he did to the committee staff, yeah, I'm getting paid tens of millions of dollars to take care of a certain road over here. Yes, I drive around with equipment that's not been approved or authorized on that. I don't even know about the rules that they have. Then I'm paying off police, and I'm paying off members of the Afghan national military as well. So I think there's been a lot to go on here and get people started on this thing quite some time ago. General Phillips, I look at your statement. Actually, it was Mr. Mossack's statement here. Notwithstanding media coverage regarding incidents involving private security contractors, the frequency of serious incidents by DoD private security contractors is extraordinarily low. These numbers seem to demonstrate that, on the whole, United States private security contractors are operating in accordance with the host nation laws and support for overall counterinsurgency objectives. That leads me to believe that you think just because there haven't been enough reports, that in and of itself is proof that everything's going just fine. The host nation laws are being complied with, our counterinsurgency strategy is intact, when in fact Commander Rahula says, I've lost 454 guys. I never filed a single report. Now, your own rules and regulations require that every time there's a discharge, there's supposed to be a report. Never mind every time that somebody dies. So obviously that isn't happening. This idea that there aren't any reports filed isn't conclusive evidence that that's the case. Who is supposed to be responsible on the ground for actually having eyes-on proof of whether or not there are checkpoints set up from time to time where there are bribes extracted for police or the national military in Afghanistan? I mean, just because you don't get a report that it's happening doesn't mean that, it may not be happening. In fact, you got reports, or not saying you particularly, but all the way up and down the chain, there are reports that it was happening. And yet nobody that I know of, not a contractor and not anybody in the military that's supposed to be charged with the responsibility of oversight, ever went out, except for one instance, Colonel Lewis went out about 200 or 300 yards from the gate, and he said, when I got out there, it seemed that they changed their behavior and stopped doing what they were doing, but I wasn't allowed to go out again or go any further. So unless somebody's going out and seeing whether or not there are these checkpoints set up for bribes, unless somebody's going out and seeing a fellow like Rahula getting paid off gobs of money, and then whether or not he's paying anybody else, whether or not you're going out, and we have a list here of 44 different areas of the road said to be controlled by different people. Commander Mariula, Masud, Anga, Bamat, Masud, Sharb, Hababula, Koka, Turjan, and Rahula. Unless somebody's out there seeing that these people are getting paid or they otherwise wouldn't go through or whatever, who's responsible for doing that? Because you people may never hear about it further up the chain. But if we're not letting anybody go out and do periodic inspections, if we're not letting somebody go out and put eyes on, then I don't see how you can say you're managing and overseeing these contracts. You know, and just the fact that the contractors didn't rate incident reports, if that's how you reach a conclusion everything is fine, I think that's, that should be problematical to us on that. So, I'll just leave that as a rhetorical question. I think the answer is pretty clear, but General Nicholson, I'll say this to you. I understand everybody would think it's a terrible thing if the Taliban's been.
So you actually like this guy, John F. Tierney. Kind of like his voice. I'll joke about the other guy being gay. That sounds a bit gay, but I kind of like his voice a lot. I'm guessing it's Southern. But he actually, keeps going on the question. He leaves it rhetorical at the end. But, he doesn't just take it for an answer, just keeps going. It's good. It's good to see someone in the committee actually doing that. So they actually discusses a bit about Rahula, about how, he says he happily admits to them to bribing these people. He says in the report, or a cup of tea in Dubai, that he bribed governors, police, army, anyone who needed to. And then he's talking about obviously the protection rackets here that, if they don't get their money, there's trouble. Who's overlooking it? And again, just all of them, just so they don't know, or they're willfully ignorant is probably maybe a better answer, because I think it's like if you're the president and say you're in the 50s and Alan Dulles, he's got MK Ultra on the go, he's got Operation Paperclip, and over a period, obviously not all at once, news paper and media are on their payroll. You got the coup in Iran, Guatemala, the president doesn't always want to know all about it. It's just, don't tell me, because then he has plausible deniability. I'm sure there's many military officials at the top who'd rather not be briefed on every single thing, like the butcher and these different, activities going on, because then, they could commit perjury. I don't think a government official has ever been done for perjury. I'm sure one has, but, they lie all the time, and nothing's gonna happen, is it? So we're actually going to show a little clip that talks about, the contract, the amount of money it is compared to the GDP of Afghanistan as a whole. It is a 2.16 billion contract, but one of the army guys talks about how they probably won't get to the end of that. It was just a roof so they'd have enough money basically to keep spending. They wouldn't run out. But he says they would probably still get to $1 billion. So I don't care if it's 2.16 billion or $1 billion. A million, even £1 million, a normal person with a lot. £10 million, so much more. 1 billion. It's an insane amount of money that's going. Rahula makes several millions every year, because there's 6,000 to 8,000 missions per month. He's the largest security provider to this supply route to the contractors. Think about if he just takes £1,000 every mission, because they charge per truck as well. Think about how much money he's making. It's insane. So let's go to the next one. Discusses a bit about money falling in the Taliban's hands and the contract. Just go back a bit. You'll see a few different committee members. Let's start from this Asian lady.
I find it disturbing that our budget for private security contractors is $2.16 billion, and that is such a large percentage of the GDP of Afghanistan, which is $13 billion. It's 1/5 of the GDP of the entire country of Afghanistan, and therefore this money is a lucrative source of revenue for the people of Afghanistan. So my questions have to do with questioning whether a portion of our taxpayers' dollars are going to the Taliban. And so first let me ask General Nicholson about one summer 2008 incident where Commander Ruhula's agents accompanying a host nation trucking contractor along Highway 1 allegedly tipped off insurgents about an approaching convoy and were then allowed to pass unharmed before the insurgents attacked the convoy. Doesn't this suggest that Ruhala, who is responsible for the lion's share of convoy security in southern Afghanistan, that he has a working relationship with the Taliban?
Yeah, ma'am, I would have to take that incident and examine it. I don't have the details of that incident at my fingertips. If that was in the report we received this morning, we'll gladly get together with our investigative team in country and further develop that and see if the investigative team can tell us what they found.
Give further
Ma'am, could I,
illumination.
if I could, sir, if I could make one clarification. The host nation trucking contract is $2.16 billion, but it's not just for private security contractors. The majority of that actually goes for the short and long haul for the 8 contractors that are serving every day. We increased it to $2.16 billion. The expenditure to date is about $700,000 per day in terms of an average day, what we would spend on truck operations. To date, since we awarded the contract in March of 2009, we've expended about $350 million against a ceiling of $2.16 billion. The contract will expire, I believe, around April, May of 11. So we're about 9 or 10 months from expiration. It is very doubtful that we today will get to the ceiling of $2.16 billion given the current burn rate of $700,000 per day. It was simply a ceiling that we knew or were assured that we could have the right number of trucks available to be able to deliver the equipment and supplies to warfighters. But it's doubtful today that we'll reach the ceiling.
And your estimate of how much we actually will expend is what?
Ma'am, I'll have to get back with you on that, but I could, we could look at it and do the math and look at the surge operations that are going to occur and then give you an estimate of where we might be in a year from now. But in my personal opinion, I doubt if we'll get to $1 billion or much over $1 billion in terms of execution by the end of the actual contract. But I'll get back with you with a more firm answer from JCCIA.
I would have to say, though, that even if it's $1 billion, $1 billion versus $13 billion for the entire GDP of Afghanistan still is substantial. General Nicholson, beyond the incident involving Ruhala's agents reportedly tipping off insurgents, several other host nation trucking contractors have stated that Ruhala openly coordinates with and pays off Taliban insurgents to help secure safe passage when it's convenient for him to do so. And there was an incident report that was filed by a contractor in 2007 explicitly stating that a Taliban commander had demanded protection money for the safe passage of goods. And a meeting of host nation trucking contract project managers requested greater armament authority from the Department of Defense to protect themselves and avoid paying an estimated $1.6 to $2 million per week to the insurgency. So even if a small percentage of this money is reaching the Taliban, what are the consequences for our counterinsurgency strategy?
Yes, ma'am. First off, that would be unacceptable. U.S. taxpayer dollars going to the enemy. And it's something that every commander in Afghanistan certainly would be concerned about and would want to stop immediately. When we receive anecdotal intelligence reports or human intelligence, then those don't constitute evidence, as General Phillips described, but we take those and then we look for the linkages between criminal networks and the government, criminal networks and contractors, and pass that information to our investigative agencies to examine that so that we can then take the appropriate action. And that may include referring it to the Afghan government for arrests. For example, we've recently seen some arrests of Afghan general officers in the border police who have been engaged in corrupt practices. We've seen arrests of district police chiefs in RC South, for example, for drug running. So there is a nascent and growing capacity within the Afghan government to act against corrupt officials. But under no circumstances would the funneling of U.S. dollars to the enemy be acceptable to any of us. The key is getting that information, developing it more fully, and then being able to take the appropriate action. Another thing I wanted to follow up on, ma'am, that you mentioned earlier.
Find it pretty funny that the Asian was the one who brought up the math, as the guy said, and all the economics. Just joking. She's actually looking out for the taxpayers, because at the end of the day, this is a 2.16 billion contract. Whatever, is £700,000 a day. Taxpayers £700,000, dollars a day, is being spent on this futile mission to basically end up funding more. Or even if the money's not the taxpayers' money, not ending on the Taliban, you're still paying the butcher Rahula to guard the supplies to get to the US base so they can continue this occupation against Afghanistan. It's crazy. I'd just like to point out one thing. This guy here was so asleep earlier. He's actually a panel member next. He's closing his eyes and then open again, but he looked like he's properly asleep earlier, and he, where you like that, then you open up, you have a little look around. He's the next panel member, and even if he's bored about this, cool. That's pretty funny. He's a bit old. Maybe needs a nap. Get a bit stereotypy with these Asians and olds. Just to show you just how long the bit in the report is about the DoD, just to show, obviously they're talking a lot about how many reports, and they've used a couple of examples. This and this is all the DoD. So from page 49 to 67, which is 18 pages, is all just about the DoD having no oversight and the warnings. Look at this, like 12 pages, 5, not that many, 2 chapters, 20 pages, 18 pages on the DoD having no visibility, not doing any reporting. The people in charge of the contract, the military officials in there, say they have zero visibility, have never gone out or spoke to anyone. And one time they went out the base to have a look at what the Afghan army was doing, in case like checkpoints and stuff. They acted differently. But yeah, just to show how many, I'm not going to go through the examples because I did that in the last one, last video, but just think about this. A lot more pages just about that. This is why they're mainly focusing in on this rather than, actually talking about the details. But we've heard a bit about Rahula. She brought up outside of the economics, just kidding about that. She obviously brought up about money falling to the Taliban. And it's good to see some people in the government actually caring where your taxpayer money goes. I like the military. If you're in the military, not a soldier, and you're anywhere near the top, you do not give one shit about taxpayers' money. Their budget is like this time it's probably like 600 billion, probably maybe 500. You can't care about taxpayers' money when spending that much money on the military compared to like everything else. 700 billion to maintain all these bases, like 800 bases around the world to spread democracy. No one has 800 bases around the world in pretty much every country has a base because they're so, they're policing everywhere. There's human rights being abused here and here. But what about your money that's going towards these warlords who commit human rights abuses? That's fine. Just what? Anyway, that was a bit of a side note. But if you're at top in the military, you do not care about taxpayer money because as well they know how poorly the Afghan war was going. Well, maybe make a generalization there. Don't matter. The amount of money they're spending on these wars, £700 billion budget. At least someone in the committee is asking about this taxpayer money falling in there, and he's just so happy that no, it's not. We're not going to spend 2.16 billion. It's probably under $1 billion, and we only spend $700,000 a day just on this. Not even the other stuff. This is just one contract. This is just getting supplies. This isn't even the war fighting. The contracts to Lockheed Martin and stuff buying arms. This is just getting supplies. Think about a whole report investigation on how much has gone wrong getting supplies and all the wrong people being funded, all these different coalition NATO forces being checkmated with working with these people, money possibly falling to the Taliban. It's just to get food, ammunition, and certain vehicles there. Like, this is nothing. I'm sure there's probably more, but there's so much more to cover in Afghanistan, and I probably will at some point. So this next video is just about the guy in the middle, the government official, the Secretary Assistant to Defense, DoD. He actually talks about, basically saying, they sort of say these are allegations, investigation. There's so many witnesses. It's in their documents. Like, they're not allegations. They're in their documents. Just because they never went out and bothered to look them for sale, they can just say, "Oh, this is just anecdotal evidence from like 500 people over like so many years before and after," which is a cop out. He actually sort of says, "I'm sure everything the report's true." Mentions what Hillary Clinton said and a bit of corruption and what the UN said. So let's go to that.
To say that
This guy.
Security forces.
What do we call it? Let's go back to his question, actually.
Standards. And this is one of the approaches towards
Is going to retention rates
This is the list.
and the success rates are difficult, but I don't want to take up all of Mr. Flake's time. Mr. Flake.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I might borrow this, this is in the report. This is the list that the chairman read from, that the security contractors list who controls which miles of the road. Are you aware of how many miles or any in particular that are controlled by the Afghan security forces? Mr. Mossack?
No, sir. That was the first time I saw that chart. So
aside from the chart, are we aware? Are there certain areas?
We are aware that, and it goes back to what's in the report. I think it's safe to say that virtually everything in the report was in fact reported to many authorities. I'm sure that most of it was investigated by the appropriate task forces, or is being investigated by the appropriate task forces. But the reality is that we may not have gotten to a level of evidence that permits us to do something in every case that would meet the requirement. Clearly, the information in general has come forward. The Secretary of State made the comment that's in the preface of your report. The Secretary of Defense has said we're concerned about corruption. The UN does a survey, and inside the urban areas of Afghanistan, the number one issue is corruption. 59% of the nation cares about it. We've got it. Admiral Dassault is over there with another additional task force with forensic accountants, not just accountants, but forensic accountants to try to track the dollars. I would caution you that one of the frustrations I have, I used to be a part-time policeman in New Jersey, and I know it's, talking to my old detective buddies, how difficult it was to get a case against organized crime. It took years, and that was an environment with a baseline banking system, a baseline pay system, baseline telecommunication system. We're doing this in another environment where it's not going to happen, in my estimation, overnight. But I assure you, we're taking it all seriously. I would be as frustrated as you are that you've seen the issues being reported and you don't see an effect being occurred very, very quickly. But
that's the frustration.
Yeah, I realize that. If I was a cop on the other side, I'd say, damn it, I'm doing what I can with what I got.
So this investigation has been going on for 6 months, the committee's investigation. Yes. Yet there seems to be very little awareness. In fact, we only got last week any indication that the Department of Defense was doing really anything on the subject, and that was just in the form of a PowerPoint presentation about. But we, as the chairman mentioned, there's very little evidence that people are moving outside of the security gates, or that you're taking reports of casualties or fire that have to be, under our law, reported. We either have to say we're taking those reports and are ignoring them, or assuming that there's no bad actors out there, none of this happening. It can't be both. But let me just ask General Nicholson, you mentioned that if this activity were occurring, these payoffs to warlords, a parallel authority structure outside of the Afghan government, that is counter to our coined strategy in Afghanistan. At what point do we say if these allegations are true, if half of these allegations are true, if a tenth of these allegations are true in this report, or the findings in this report, that we have to adjust our strategy because this runs so counter to the coin strategy. At what point, where's the tipping point there? At what point will we, as a committee that has oversight here, hear the Department of Defense simply say, hey, this is just the cost of doing business and it's more important to move goods and services, or we simply can't tolerate this kind of parallel authority structure outside of the Afghan government operating in the countryside?
Yes, sir. Our activities to counter corruption are central to the campaign, and we're engaging at all levels of our government. As you know, President Obama with President Karzai, all the way down to the U.S. units partnered with police inside Kandahar City, trying to improve performance and accountability with their Afghan partners. So this is a high priority for us.
Well, let me just say, we hear that on the top. We hear the statement that's in the report, Secretary Clinton. We've heard the statements in the report that President Obama has said. We see this report, all of these findings, this overwhelming evidence from this investigation that this is occurring, yet in the middle, from those who have authority to address the situation, actually on the ground, by amending a contract or stripping somebody of the contract or making sure that this is not occurring, we don't see any activity there. And that's where the frustration lies.
He sums it up so well there. You know, they say this is a top priority, you know, we're doing all this stuff. It goes against our counterinsurgency coin strategy. Well, if it's so important, then every time they would have got a report of this, they would have squashed it on the head. Like you said, they would have terminated the contract. They would have, you know, given them more support, maybe send a couple military people with there, or, you know, to take away, you know, if there's a military figure on with the truck and you get to a checkpoint, the police probably aren't going to ask for a bribe. The army isn't, a governor isn't, unless it's one they favor, of course. So they can't say, oh, you know, this is so important to us, because they had reports before the contract even happened, warning about safe passage of the Taliban. Hillary Clinton has even said it in the thing. You can't wait till you're caught and then we're like, yeah, you're right. This is a top priority. We're getting on it. We're already doing this and this and this. We're going to do this. If it's such a priority, then don't wait to get caught. Don't wait till you're in a congressional hearing under oath on video, needing to seem like, you know, of course we don't want to fund the Taliban. Of course we don't want to. Well, I definitely don't think they want to do that. But whether they care about Warlord to get money, I'm not convinced. As long as it works, to be honest. And there's obviously warlords that they favor that they would pay anyway. Whether who knows behind the scenes. But he sums it up so well that you could have, you know, people on the ground could have made a difference before now. So don't give me that stuff. Don't give me that shit. Last clip, just basically the committee just saying how easy it was for them to do this investigation. And again, tying into if the DoD cared so much, they could have done a proper investigation themselves, not a committee. Now, what they could have just done it themselves. They had the files, they had the reports from the contractors. You know, they had to investigate this. The DoD has it already. That, you know, they can further investigate it. But the committee had to get these, you know, these documents, these 25,000. You had to probably free the information out. Probably not actually from the government. They had to receive this. They had to. The only reason they probably started is because they just kept hearing this happening. You know, popping up in the media and the Financial Times and stuff that, you know, NATO forces are having to pay these warlords off for security so much they're like, let's probe into it. The DoD had it already. They had it because it was direct documents to them. Being the contractors asking, can we have better weapons so it doesn't, so we're better equipped for money to go into the insurgents' hands for safe passage. Anyway, this is just the last clip that demonstrates how easy it was, and the DoD clearly didn't want to do it themselves.
I think that is still in review.
As you call them, ever get outside the gate, okay? And the JCCIA now is going to fix up the legal paperwork on that, and that's good. That's a step in the right direction. But unless somebody actually gets out to check and see whether or not that's being complied with, leaves us right back in the same boat on that. And I just want to take quick issue. A couple of times it's it's been inferred, maybe intentionally or not intentionally, that, geez, if we just had the hard facts, we'd be able to do something on that. It took one email to Watan Risk Management to set up an interview with both of the principals of that company, both of whom have done jail time in the United States, incidentally, before they got their present position, and to have them bring along Commander Rahula to an interview with the committee staff, where he then readily admitted that he was making huge piles of money and had an extraordinarily large militia, that he was driving around with weaponry that wasn't allowable without authorization, that he basically controlled areas of the road and knew other people who controlled other parts of different roads and what their conduct had been, and that he had paid off certain members of the ANA and the ANP and would name names for everybody. So it wasn't like it wasn't out there for somebody to get. I just want to make that point. Mr. Welch, if you have 5 minutes, I welcome you to it.
Just to clarify, the ANA is the military and the ANP is the police. And he named names. Interesting. So he's probably my favorite guy. And then the other guy, Flake, who you just heard from before. The Asian one, they're the main two, but the other ones who spoke, some of them weren't great, really. Some of the questions they asked. Like, if you were in a committee and you've just done an investigation, they're there, you can ask hard questions. Ask them. Again, it's probably a bit intimidating because they're military, and there's also this veneer of just respect. Veneer? I'm not going to vote that right. Respect for the military, where they don't want to embarrass them. They think they have all the good intentions, and they might not always have good intentions, but they just always sort of treat them in the best light possible first, and treat every question like, oh, we're sorry to ask this, sort of, like, we know what you're doing there, and we know how hard it is to get these supplies, and don't occupy, don't invade a country if you don't have a proper strategy, or just say your aims aren't to get rid of corruption. They obviously ain't going to say that, but if your aim is to get rid of corruption, you care so much, then you wouldn't put up with this. But I think I'll leave it there. Read article if you just want it shortened down from the report. I'm not going to watch the hearing, probably, are you? I'll put everything in the link. Some of you might. Come on, some of you might want to watch it. You never know. I watched it. It's not exactly something you need to watch, really. I've showed you the clips. I wanted more clips, but that was the key bits needed, really. Some of it, as I said, the other committee members just weren't worth being clipped, really. Check out my other video I did on it, where I go into more detail about the actual report. This was obviously just more focused on the DoD, the lack of visibility, and the committee actually going, asking some hard questions. But yeah, if you want to learn more about Rahula, Matula, it rhymes so well, I almost want to make a song out of it. But I won't start singing for you, not yet anyway. But yeah, you can learn a lot more there, a lot of information. But I took the key parts of that report and put in the article. So take your pick. I've made it easy for you. I've written an article, I've read parts of the report, all the key bits, and now I've clipped it for you. So take your pick of what one you want. As I said, everything will be in the show notes. So yeah, thanks for listening. If you made it to the end, I'm very thankful. Like it, share it with any friends if you think it's interesting. No problem. I'll see you next time. Hopefully I'll carry on just doing videos with Afghanistan. I probably will start doing a few videos in between, just because there's pretty interesting stuff popping up, like the John Bolton clip, just sort of easy 10-15 minute videos rather than always having an hour video. Do like long form videos, because when you're doing something, eating or whatever, doing a bit of work, you have to keep finding a new video, and then you can end up just on random recommended videos on YouTube. But I know not everyone likes long form, so I'll try and mix it up. And just easier for me is to do a few short videos on just snappy topics that you don't have to read a whole report or listen to a whole hearing. It's just a quick clip of some interesting information. So yeah, I'll leave it there. Thank you for listening on the Truth Over Comfort show, and I look forward to doing another video soon.